The storm had arrived with a vengeance. It swept across the small Montana town like an uninvited monster, devouring everything in its path. Snow fell in thick, suffocating waves, piling high against doorsteps, burying fences, swallowing entire streets until nothing familiar remained. The wind howled like a wounded animal, shrieking as it tore through the narrow alleyways, rattling windows and bending trees under its merciless force. It wasn't just cold. It was the kind of cold that stole the breath from your lungs, that clung to your bones like a death grip, that made even the strongest creatures bend and break under its weight. No one should have been outside in a night like this. Even the houses, their chimneys puffing out thin wisps of smoke, seemed to huddle together against the storm, their warm interiors cut off from the frozen wasteland outside. The world beyond their walls had ceased to exist. But Sadie was out there. The cream-colored Labrador retriever trudged forward, her body nearly unrecognizable beneath the layers of ice clinging to her fur. Her once strong frame was now thin and frail, her ribs faintly visible beneath the thick coat that had long since lost its warmth. Snow stuck to her eyelashes, weighing them down, blurring her vision until all she could see was an endless expanse of white. Her paws ached. Every step was a battle. The ice beneath her was unforgiving, cutting into the soft pads of her feet, making her stumble with every few steps. She had lost track of how long she had been walking, hours, maybe days. The storm had erased all sense of time, turning her journey into one long, endless struggle against the cold. But she could not stop. Stopping meant never getting up again. The wind screamed in her ears, a cruel and mocking voice that whispered, "Give up, give in, let go." It promised warmth if she just closed her eyes, if she just lay down for a moment, just for a second. But she knew better. She had seen what happened to creatures that surrendered to the cold. She had passed them. Small frozen shapes buried beneath the snow, their bodies curled inward as if they had simply fallen asleep. That would not be her. She refused. Sadie forced herself forward, even as her legs trembled beneath her, even as her breath came in short, labored gasps. She had to keep going, because she wasn't just running for herself. Somewhere out there, beyond the howling storm, beyond the endless sea of white, something more important than her own survival was waiting for her. Her heart pounded, not just from exhaustion, but from something deeper. Fear. Not fear for herself, fear for them. She didn't know how much longer they could last. The blizzard had stolen every familiar landmark, turning roads she once knew into unfamiliar, treacherous paths. The town, once a place of warmth and safety, now loomed before her like a cold, lifeless prison. But she had to find her way. She was running out of time. A sudden gust of wind slammed into her side, nearly knocking her off balance. She staggered, her legs buckling beneath her for just a moment before she caught herself. Her head hung low, ears pinned back against the roar of the storm, but still, she kept moving. Because she had to. Somewhere ahead, beyond the walls of ice and wind, was the only thing that mattered. She would not stop, not until she found them. Sadie trudged through the frozen streets, her body a trembling shadow against the blinding white. The wind screamed through the narrow alleyways, whipping ice and snow against her frail frame. Her once strong legs barely lifted from the ground before sinking into the thick drifts, each step an unbearable weight. She had been walking for so long that time had blurred into nothingness, the storm swallowing every memory of warmth and comfort. Her nose, crusted with ice, barely caught sense anymore. The hunger that gnawed at her belly had dulled into a distant ache, overshadowed by the exhaustion pressing down on her like an invisible force. But she could not stop. Not yet. The cold was unbearable, but the loneliness was worse. She moved through the town like a ghost, slipping between darkened houses where lights glowed softly behind frosted windows. She knew what was inside: warmth, safety, people huddled together beneath blankets, sipping hot drinks by crackling fires. But she did not belong there. She had once. Once, there had been a home, a name spoken with love, a place where she was wanted. That was gone now. Now she was just another stray in the storm, a forgotten creature lost in the snow. But she had to keep going. Somewhere inside these houses, someone had to help. She reached the first door and hesitated only for a second before lifting her paw and scratching softly. Her touch was weak, barely a whisper against the wooden frame. She waited, her breath coming in short, uneven puffs. The wind howled. No answer. She tried again, pressing her cold, raw nose against the door, leaving behind a faint smear of frost. A shuffle. A sound from inside. Her heart leaped with fragile hope. The door creaked open just an inch, revealing a sliver of dim light. A man's face emerged, middle-aged, tired, his features drawn in tight lines. His eyes flickered down at her, unreadable. For a moment, Sadie held his gaze, pleading in the only way she could. "Please, please help me." But the man sighed, shook his head, and before she could react, the door slammed shut. The warmth was gone. The light disappeared. And Sadie was alone again. She stood there for a long moment, her paws rooted to the frozen porch, the rejection sinking in deeper than the cold ever could. But she had to keep moving. She turned away, forcing herself back into the storm. Another house, another door. Sadie dragged herself forward, her body heavy with exhaustion. The snow came up to her belly now, each step a struggle. She lifted her paw, scratched weakly at the next door, barely able to keep her balance. This time, the door cracked open just a little wider. A woman peered out, young, with worried eyes. She gasped softly, stepping forward as if she might help. Sadie's tail gave the smallest wag, a desperate flicker of hope. But then a voice called from inside, a man's voice, sharp and impatient. "Helen, shut the door! We're not running a shelter!" The woman hesitated. For a second, just 1 second, Sadie thought she would change her mind. But then her face tightened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. And then the door closed. The warmth, the light, gone. Sadie shivered violently, her legs barely holding her up. She had to keep going. House after house, door after door. Some never opened at all. Some cracked open just enough for a shadow to appear. A glimpse of warmth before the inevitable rejection. Some waved her away as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. At one house, she barely had time to reach the porch before the door burst open. A man stood there, tall and scowling, his face twisted with irritation. "Get out of here," he snapped. Sadie flinched. Before she could react, he kicked a boot toward her, the movement sharp and aggressive. She stumbled back, her frozen limbs barely able to move fast enough to get out of his reach. "Stupid mutt," the man muttered, before slamming the door shut. The sound echoed in the empty street. Sadie stood there, motionless. She didn't understand. She had done nothing wrong. Why wouldn't anyone help her? The wind pushed against her, a cruel reminder that she had nowhere else to go. She swallowed hard and moved forward. She had to keep moving. But she was slowing down. Her steps, once determined, now wavered. Her legs sagged with exhaustion, her body swaying with each labored breath. Her pups. A sharp pain struck her chest at the thought. Where were they now? Had they survived? Were they just as lost, just as cold, just as desperate for shelter? She should have been with them. She should have protected them. Sadie stumbled. Her legs finally gave out, her body collapsing into the deep snow. Cold seeped into every inch of her, wrapping around her like an unrelenting grip. She gasped, but there was no warmth, no comfort, only ice, only wind. She lay there, trembling violently, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. Ahead, the row of houses stood in silent judgment, so warm inside, so safe. And yet, none of them had opened their doors. A shadow passed behind a window. Someone had seen her. Someone was watching. Sadie held their gaze, her golden eyes pleading. Please, please don't turn away. But the curtain twitched, and then they disappeared. The window darkened. The house, like all the others, remained closed. Sadie's eyelids drooped. So heavy. The storm raged on. The blizzard howled, and she lay there, sinking into the snow, feeling the last remnants of hope slip away. Would no one open their door? Would no one save her? The world around her faded into white, and then a light. At the end of the street, barely visible through the storm, a small house, and a tiny figure standing in the doorway, watching, and then the door opened. Sadie's legs trembled as she forced herself forward, her paws dragging through the deep snow. Every step felt heavier, her body drained of all warmth, all strength. The storm had swallowed the world around her, reducing everything to an endless swirl of white. She could barely see anymore, her vision blurred by the wind, by the ice that clung to her lashes, by the sheer weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. She was so tired. She had tried so many doors, so many warm lights behind windows, so many voices whispering behind closed doors, but none of them had let her in. She didn't know how much longer she could keep going. But then, through the thick veil of snow, a glow appeared in the distance. A house, small and unassuming, sitting at the very end of the road. Its windows glowed with the golden warmth of firelight, standing out like a beacon against the frozen, desolate town. Unlike the others, it seemed quiet, almost separate, as if untouched by the cold indifference that had shut her out so many times before. Sadie's breath hitched. Could this be the one? Or would this door, too, close in her face, leaving her to disappear into the storm? She had no choice but to try. With the last remnants of her strength, she pushed forward, her legs barely responding. Her paws, cracked and raw, slipped against the icy wooden steps of the porch. She lifted one trembling paw and scratched at the door. It was barely a sound, lost against the howling wind. She tried again. And then, inside the house, curled up on a thick, fuzzy blanket, Emily sat beside the fireplace, her small hands wrapped around a steaming cup of hot chocolate. The warmth of the fire flickered against the walls, casting dancing shadows across the cozy living room. The storm outside was only a muffled roar, distant and forgotten. Emily loved nights like this, the way the cold outside made the warmth inside feel even cozier. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, sipping the rich, sweet drink, feeling completely safe. Until a movement outside caught her eye. A shadow. Her small brows furrowed as she leaned toward the window, pressing her hand against the frosted glass. And then, through the swirling snow, she saw them. A pair of eyes staring back at her. Wide, golden, filled with something that made Emily's heart ache even though she didn't fully understand why. They looked lost, desperate, not just cold, alone. Her breath caught in her throat. "Mom," she whispered at first, then louder, urgent this time. "Mom!" Sarah, standing in the kitchen washing dishes, barely registered her daughter's voice at first. She was exhausted. It had been a long day, groceries, bills, work. Single motherhood was hard enough without a storm like this battering their small town. "Lily, what is it?" she called over her shoulder, drying her hands on a dish towel. But Emily was already scrambling off the couch, running toward the front door. "There's a dog!" Sarah frowned, turning just as Emily reached for the lock. "A dog?" "Outside!" Emily's voice was breathless, urgent. "She's freezing, Mom! We have to help her!" Sarah hesitated. A stray dog, in this weather? She moved toward the window, pulling back the curtain slightly, and there, barely visible through the storm, was the dog. Sarah inhaled sharply. The poor thing was barely standing. Its fur, soaked and frozen in patches, hung off its gaunt frame. Its legs trembled so badly Sarah didn't know how it was still upright. It was staring at the door, not moving, not barking, just waiting. She knew that look. It wasn't just cold. It wasn't just lost. It had been turned away, over and over again. Sarah closed her eyes for a brief moment. She knew what she should do. Close the curtain, pull Emily back, pretend she hadn't seen anything. They weren't in a position to take in a dog. Money was tight. They barely had enough space as it was. But then Emily's small hand tugged at her sleeve. "Please, Mom," she whispered. "She's going to die." Sarah's heart clenched. She had always taught Emily to be kind, to help when she could. But was this something they could afford to do? She looked back at the dog. It was still waiting. She sighed. "Step back," she said. Emily's face lit up as Sarah reached for the lock. The moment the door cracked open, the storm rushed inside, an icy blast that sent shivers through both mother and daughter. And then, Sadie collapsed. Right there, right on the doorstep. Emily let out a small cry, dropping to her knees. "Mom!" Sarah didn't even hesitate. She crouched down, hands reaching for the dog, and the moment she touched Sadie's frozen fur, her breath caught. She was ice cold. Too cold. Sarah acted on instinct, wrapping her arms around the trembling body and lifting her inside. She wasn't heavy. She was too thin, too weak to even struggle. Emily ran ahead, already grabbing one of the thick blankets from the couch. "Here, Mom!" Sarah laid Sadie down on the rug near the fire, draping the blanket over her frail body. The dog barely moved. Emily's hands hovered above her, unsure, before she finally reached out, her small fingers brushing gently over Sadie's ice-crusted ears. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now." Sarah sat back on her heels, watching as the golden retriever, this stranger, this lost soul, finally stopped shaking. She knew deep down this wouldn't just be for tonight. Emily had already made up her mind, and Sarah wasn't sure she could turn her away. For the first time in a long time, the storm had lost its grip on Sadie. For the first time in days, she was warm. For the first time in forever, she was not alone. Sarah hesitated. The storm outside was relentless, howling through the open doorway like a wild animal demanding to be heard. The bitter wind snaked into the house, wrapping around her legs, making her shiver despite the warmth inside. Her mind screamed at her to be practical. They had barely enough for themselves. She had worked so hard to keep things together, to keep the bills paid, to make sure Emily never felt like they were struggling. And now, a half-frozen, starving dog lay collapsed on their doorstep, barely clinging to life. But then Emily knelt beside the trembling creature, wrapping her small arms around the dog's fragile body. Tears welled in her big brown eyes as she whispered, "Mom, she's going to die." Sarah's chest tightened. She looked down at the dog, at the way her body convulsed with uncontrollable shivers, at the dull, desperate eyes that barely stayed open. Sarah swallowed hard. She knew what she should do. Close the door, turn away, pretend she never saw. But she couldn't. The thought of leaving this animal to freeze out there, knowing no one else would help, knowing she had been turned away too many times already, it was unbearable. She took a deep breath. Then she nodded. "Move back, sweetheart." Emily scrambled away as Sarah crouched down and carefully scooped the dog into her arms. She expected the dog to resist, to shrink away, maybe even growl out of fear. But Sadie didn't. She didn't move at all. Sarah's stomach twisted. A healthy dog would have reacted, flinched, struggled, something. But Sadie simply sagged against her, too weak to care, too exhausted to fight. That realization sent a wave of guilt crashing over Sarah. This poor dog had been suffering for days, and no one had helped, until now. She stepped inside and kicked the door shut, sealing out the brutal storm behind them. The warmth hit Sadie immediately. She stirred slightly, a small, weak whimper escaping her lips, as if she could finally feel the contrast between the freezing world outside and the haven she had just entered. Sarah gently laid her down on a thick towel beside the fireplace. The dog's breathing was ragged, her fur still slick with melted snow, ice clinging stubbornly to her paws. Emily wasted no time. She darted toward the hallway, grabbing another towel from the linen closet, then dropped to her knees beside Sadie. Together, they worked in silence, wiping away the freezing moisture, rubbing warmth back into her fragile body. Sarah carefully draped a heavy blanket over the retriever's shivering frame, tucking it around her like a cocoon. Sadie let out a long, shaky breath. She was still trembling, but the worst of the chill was starting to fade. Emily gently ran her fingers through Sadie's damp fur, smoothing it back. "You're safe now," she whispered. Sarah sat back, pressing a hand to her forehead. She wasn't sure what she had just done, whether it had been the right decision. But looking at Emily, at the quiet determination in her eyes, at the way she refused to turn away, Sarah felt something settle inside her. Maybe this was the only choice. A sudden rustling sound made them both look down. Sadie was stirring. Her ears twitched slightly, and then, with a great effort, she lifted her head. Emily gasped. "She's waking up!" Sadie's movements were sluggish, her muscles weak and stiff, but she sniffed the air. Sarah's brows furrowed. What was she looking for? Then she understood. "She's hungry," Sarah murmured. Emily's eyes widened. She scrambled to her feet. "I'll get food." Sarah almost stopped her. They didn't have much to spare. But one look at Sadie's sunken frame, at the way she barely had the strength to hold her head up, and Sarah knew they couldn't deny her this. "Okay," she said softly. Emily ran to the kitchen, the sound of cabinets opening and closing echoing in the quiet house. Moments later, she returned with a small bowl filled with leftover rice and shredded chicken. "It's not much," she admitted, setting it down gently in front of Sadie. Sadie's nose twitched. For a moment, she simply stared at the food. Then, as if something inside her clicked, she lunged forward, burying her face in the bowl, eating as if she had never seen food before. Emily gasped again, covering her mouth. Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. The dog devoured every last grain, licking the bowl clean, her frail body still trembling but filled with a new kind of urgency. It wasn't just hunger, it was survival. Sarah exhaled, shaking her head. "She hasn't eaten in days," she murmured. Emily reached out and gently placed her hand on Sadie's paw. The retriever barely reacted. She simply sighed, a deep, relieved, exhausted sound, and laid her head back down on the blanket. Emily smiled softly. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to fight anymore. You're safe now." Sarah watched as Sadie's eyes, finally free from fear and desperation, began to droop. She was warm, fed, no longer alone. For the first time in what must have been a very long time, Sadie let herself sleep. The night passed in quiet stillness, the storm finally losing its relentless grip. The soft crackling of the fireplace filled the small house, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The once howling wind had faded into a distant whisper, leaving behind a world buried under thick layers of untouched snow. Sadie lay curled on the rug, her body finally at rest. She no longer trembled violently, though every so often her paws twitched as if she were still running. Even in sleep. The warmth had seeped into her bones, loosening the stiffness in her aching limbs. She had eaten, she had been cared for, and now, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she could finally let her guard down. Emily sat beside her watching the golden retriever with quiet fascination. Her small fingers gently stroked the soft fur near Sadie's ear. feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of her breathing. There was something about the way Sadie slept, as if she had been fighting for so long that she had forgotten what it meant to rest. That was when Emily noticed it. Peeking out from beneath the thick strands of fur around Sadie's neck was something small, something nearly hidden beneath layers of ice and dirt. A collar. Emily's heart skipped. She carefully pushed the fur aside, fingers brushing against the frozen leather. It was stiff and worn, coated in a thin crust of ice. "Mom," Emily called, excitement creeping into her voice. "She has a collar." Sarah, who had been sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone, looked up. "A collar?" She frowned, standing and walking over. Emily was already working on rubbing away the ice, her small hands eager yet gentle. Bit by bit, the dirt and frost gave way, revealing something underneath. Letters, a name, Sadie. Emily's breath caught. "She has a name," she whispered, eyes wide. "Her name is Sadie." Sarah knelt down beside her daughter, reaching out to touch the worn metal tag. As Emily continued wiping it clean, more details began to emerge, a phone number and an address. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "That's not from here." Emily looked up. "She's not from this town?" Sarah shook her head, studying the engraving more closely. The address was for a place miles away, far beyond the storm-covered roads, beyond where any dog could have wandered on its own. Emily sat back on her heels. "She's not a stray," she murmured. Then, with more conviction, "Sadie's not a stray. She has a home." The realization hit them both at the same time. Sadie hadn't been wandering aimlessly. She hadn't simply been lost. She had been trying to get back home. Sarah exhaled, running a hand through her hair. There was only one thing to do. She grabbed her phone and took a picture of Sadie, her golden fur now free of ice, her body finally at peace on the warm rug. She snapped a second photo of the collar, making sure the name and address were visible. Then, she typed out a short message. "Found this dog outside our home during the storm. Her name is Sadie. If anyone knows who she belongs to, please contact me." She hesitated only a moment before pressing post. The waiting began. Would anyone recognize her? Would anyone come looking? They didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, Sarah's phone buzzed. A notification flashed across the screen. A message. Emily leaned in as Sarah tapped it open, her fingers trembling slightly. The words appeared quickly, each one hitting like a shockwave. "That's our dog. Her name is Sadie. She went missing in the storm. We've been looking everywhere for her. Please, tell us she's okay." Sarah stared at the screen. Then she looked at Sadie, still sleeping peacefully by the fire. "They're coming for her," she whispered. The knock on the door came just as the morning light began to filter through the frost-covered windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a town buried in thick snow. But inside the small house, warmth still lingered from the fire that had burned through the night. Sarah opened the door to find a man and a woman standing on the porch, their faces filled with a mix of exhaustion and hope. They were bundled in thick coats, snow still clinging to their boots from their long journey. "Are you the ones who found her?" the man asked, his voice tight with emotion. Sarah nodded. "You must be Sadie's owners." The woman, Linda Dawson, let out a sharp breath, pressing a hand to her chest. "Is she okay?" Sarah stepped aside, revealing the golden retriever curled up on the rug near the fire. Sadie lifted her head at the sound of their voices, her ears perking up slightly. The moment Mark Dawson stepped inside, Sadie's tail gave a faint wag, but there was something hesitant in the way she looked at him. Not fear, but something else. A quiet sadness, a lingering worry. Mark knelt beside her, running a hand over her fur, his fingers trembling slightly. "Sadie girl," he murmured. "We thought we lost you." Emily, standing beside her mother, couldn't hold back her question any longer. How did she get lost? Mark let out a long breath, rubbing a tired hand over his face. We live on a farm, about 10 miles from here. When the storm hit, the wind was strong, stronger than anything we'd seen before. It knocked down part of the fencing around our barn. When I went out to check, the storm had already buried everything in snow. He swallowed hard. Sadie was gone, and so were her puppies. A heavy silence filled the room. Sarah frowned. But if she was lost, why did she end up all the way here? Mark looked up, his brows knitting together. That's the thing, he said slowly. Sadie knew our land. She's never wandered far before. If she had gotten lost, she would have tried to find her way home, not run miles in the opposite direction. Emily's gaze dropped to Sadie, something clicking in her mind. She wasn't lost, Emily said softly. She turned to the adults, her voice stronger this time. Sadie wasn't trying to find her way back home. She was trying to find help. Linda let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark's expression turned pale. You mean? Emily nodded. She was running toward people, toward houses. She was trying to find someone who would help save her puppies. Sarah's breath caught. The truth hit them all at once. Sadie hadn't been wandering aimlessly, a lost dog braving the storm in confusion. She had made a choice. In the face of an unforgiving blizzard, she had left her own home, left everything familiar because she knew that staying meant certain death for her puppies. She had risked everything, traveling through the worst storm of her life, knocking on doors, begging for help. And no one had answered. Until Emily. Sadie had never been lost. She had been searching. Mark ran a shaking hand through his hair. Oh, God, he whispered. She was trying to get back to them. Linda's eyes filled with tears. We thought she ran away, but she was trying to save them all along. Emily crouched beside Sadie, wrapping her small arms around the retriever's neck. You're so brave, she whispered. Sadie sighed, her body finally relaxing. But she wasn't at peace. Not yet. Because even now, even in the warmth of the house, she still looked toward the door. Still waiting. Still searching. And Emily knew Sadie wouldn't truly rest until she found what she had been fighting for all along. Her puppies. Sarah stood up, her voice firm. We have to find them. And just like that, the real journey began. The air in the small house grew heavy with realization. Sadie lay curled by the fireplace, her golden fur now dry, her body no longer trembling from the cold. But something was still off. She wasn't resting the way a dog should after days of suffering. She wasn't at ease. Even now, as warmth surrounded her, she remained alert, her golden eyes darting toward the door every few minutes, waiting, searching. She wasn't done. Mark Dawson cleared his throat, his voice strained. Sadie. She had puppies, a litter. They were born just before the storm hit. Emily gasped. Her head snapped up to look at him, eyes wide in shock. She has babies? Mark nodded, his jaw tight. We thought they didn't make it. Linda Dawson's face was pale, her hands twisting together in her lap. We searched for them after she disappeared, she added, her voice barely above a whisper. But the storm, it was so strong, we assumed... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The meaning hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. They had given up. But Sadie hadn't. Emily turned back to the retriever, her heart hammering. Sadie hadn't been running away, she had been running back. She was trying to get to them, Emily whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it all make sense. That's why she kept going, even when she was starving, even when she was freezing. Sadie's ears perked at Emily's voice, her head tilting slightly. Then, as if the realization had hit her at the same moment it hit them, Sadie leapt to her feet. Her movements were unsteady, her legs still weak from exhaustion, but there was a new fire in her eyes, a determination that hadn't been there before, a mother's instinct. She let out a sharp, urgent bark, her tail stiff, her body vibrating with energy she shouldn't have had after all she'd been through. Sarah took an instinctive step back. "Sadie?" The retriever didn't look at her. She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes were locked on the door. She let out another bark, louder this time, then lunged forward, paws scraping against the wooden floor as she charged toward the entrance. Emily gasped. "She knows where they are!" Sadie pawed at the door, barking frantically now, desperate to be let out. Emily turned to her mother, eyes pleading. "Mom, we have to go. She's been trying to get to them this whole time." Mark and Linda exchanged a look, one of guilt, one of realization. They had thought the worst, but Sadie had known something they didn't. She had never given up on her puppies, and she wasn't about to start now. The last open door, the rescue in the snowstorm. The night air was brutally cold, sharp like a blade against their skin. The snow had settled deep, crunching beneath their hurried footsteps as they followed Sadie's determined path. The golden retriever, despite her exhaustion, moved with purpose, her nose low, her body tense with urgency. She knew exactly where she was going. Sarah, Emily, and the Dawsons struggled to keep up. The wind had calmed since the storm, but the bitter cold remained, clawing at their faces, numbing their fingers despite the thick gloves they wore. The darkness made it even harder. Only their flashlights cut through the eerie stillness of the night. Sadie didn't hesitate. She led them away from the houses, past snow-covered fences and frozen fields, pushing forward through the biting wind as if nothing else mattered. "Where is she taking us?" Linda panted, barely able to keep up. Mark shook his head. "I don't know, but we have to trust her." Emily's breath came in short gasps as she ran, her boots slipping slightly on the icy ground. But she refused to slow down. Sadie was running toward something, and they had to get there in time. After what felt like forever, but in reality was just over 15 minutes, Sadie suddenly stopped. Emily nearly ran into her. The dog stood at the edge of a clearing, her paws sinking into the deep snow as she stared at an old abandoned barn, half buried under heavy drifts. Its wooden structure creaked softly in the frigid air, as if groaning under the weight of the storm. Mark's eyes widened. "That barn, it's been abandoned for years." Sadie didn't care. She charged forward, plowing through the snow, her paws sending flurries into the air as she reached the barn door. Then she began to bark, loud, desperate. She scratched at the frozen wood, her claws scraping violently as if trying to tear through it. "She knows they're inside," Sarah breathed. Emily's hands clenched into fists. "We have to get them out." Mark didn't waste another second. He lunged for the door handle, but it was frozen solid. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling at it with all his strength. "It's iced over!" Sadie let out another frantic bark, her body trembling as if she knew every second mattered. Mark stepped back, then threw his shoulder against the wood. Once, twice. The old frame groaned but didn't give. Linda grabbed a nearby metal rod that had been half buried in the snow. "Use this!" With renewed determination, Mark jammed the rod into the gap between the doors and pried it open with a loud crack. The doors burst apart, and the sound that met them froze them in place. Tiny, weak whimpers. Emily sucked in a sharp breath as her flashlight swept across the dark interior. And there, huddled together in the farthest corner of the barn, were 5 tiny puppies. Their small bodies were pressed tightly against one another, their fur damp, their tiny chests rising and falling in weak, uneven breaths. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sadie bolted forward, leaping through the open door. She reached her babies in seconds, sniffing, licking, nudging them frantically, checking each one. Emily felt tears burn her eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered. She rushed forward, kneeling beside the fragile, trembling pups. She reached out, her hands shaking as she scooped up one of the smallest ones. Its fur was cold, its little body barely responsive. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she cradled it close to her chest. "They're alive," Linda choked out. "They're still alive." Mark exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "But not for long if we don't get them out of here," Sarah said, her voice urgent. Emily wiped her face and clutched the tiny pup tighter. "Let's take them home." The puppies had survived. As the storm faded into memory and warmth returned to the small town, the once frozen barn had become nothing more than a distant nightmare. The Dawson family, overwhelmed with gratitude, could not stop thanking Sarah and Emily for what they had done. Sadie had fought with everything she had to reach her puppies, and now, at last, she could rest knowing they were safe. The golden retriever curled protectively around her litter, her tail wagging softly as Emily knelt beside her, gently stroking the smallest puppy in her hands. "You're such a good mama," Emily whispered, watching as Sadie licked each of her pups, nudging them closer, keeping them warm even now. Mark Dawson, his voice thick with emotion, placed a hand on Sadie's head. "We owe you everything," he murmured. "She never gave up on them. And because of you, neither did we." Sarah smiled softly, watching Emily cradle the tiny white-furred puppy against her chest. "Well," she said, "I think Emily's the real hero here." Emily's eyes widened in surprise as Mark and Linda exchanged a knowing glance. "You love them, don't you?" Linda asked gently. Emily nodded without hesitation. "So much." Mark crouched down, his gaze warm. "How would you like to keep one?" Emily froze. Her heart skipped. Her breath caught in her throat. "Really?" she gasped. Linda chuckled. "We can't thank you enough for what you've done. And besides, I think one of these little ones already found their home." Emily looked down at the tiny pup in her arms. He was the smallest of the litter, his fur as white as freshly fallen snow, his little paws twitching as he let out a soft sigh in his sleep. Emily's heart swelled. She knew what his name had to be. "Snowball," she whispered, a smile stretching across her face. "I'll call you Snowball." Sadie let out a soft huff, licking the top of her smallest pup's head as if giving her approval. And just like that, Snowball was home. The story of Sadie's incredible journey didn't stay within the walls of Sarah's house. Within days, word had spread. Mr. Howard, the town's newspaper columnist, had heard about what happened and published an article on the front page. The headline read, "The Dog Who Never Gave Up, A Mother's Journey Through the Storm." The story touched everyone who read it. It wasn't just about a dog surviving a blizzard. It was about perseverance, love, and the power of kindness. People who had once ignored stray animals now stopped to help. The doors that had once been slammed shut were now opening. And then something even bigger happened. A small group of townspeople, moved by Sadie's story, decided they couldn't let another animal go through what she had. They came together and founded a local animal rescue group dedicated to helping lost and abandoned pets, making sure that no animal would ever have to scratch at doors in desperation again. Emily beamed when she heard the news. She looked at Snowball, now nestled against her, warm and safe, and whispered, "See? You and your mama changed everything." Sadie sighed contentedly, resting her head on her paws, her puppies snuggled close. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't searching anymore. She was home. Sadie's story is more than just a tale of survival. It's a testament to the power of perseverance, love, and compassion. She endured rejection, fought against impossible odds, and never gave up, not for herself, but for those who depended on her. Her unwavering determination to protect her puppies sparked kindness in those around her, proving that even the smallest act of empathy can change lives. This story reminds us that love transcends hardship and that opening our hearts, even just once, can make all the difference. In the end, it wasn't just Sadie who was saved. It was an entire town's spirit of compassion. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.